He called me selfish, a greedy old man hoarding the house I built with my own 2 hands. Then he threw his wine in my face. My daughter just watched. They thought they'd broken the old contractor. They were about to find out I still knew how to demolish a foundation. If you're listening to this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Let me back up and tell you how Christmas turned into a reckoning. The smell of pine and roasting turkey used to be my favorite scent. It was the smell of Christmas. It was the smell of Emma. Emma, my wife. She loved this time of year. We celebrated in this house for 40 years. I built this place for her. Every beam, every floorboard, every nail. I placed them all myself. I'm a contractor. I build things to last. I thought I built my family that way too. I was wrong. Emma's been gone 2 years now. Cancer took her. Slowly at first, then all at once. Without her, the house feels too big. The silence is too loud. The Christmas lights I hung outside seemed dimmer this year. Their glow couldn't reach the cold spot in my chest. I stood by the large bay window in the living room, watching the snow fall. It was a soft, gentle snow, the kind that blankets the world and muffles all sound. I was waiting for Sarah, my daughter. She was bringing her husband, Mark, and for the first time, Mark's parents, George and Linda. I wasn't looking forward to it. Not at all. Mark was a real estate developer, a man who always seemed to be calculating. He talked about assets and leverage. He had a way of making me feel small, like I was just an old obstacle in the way of his next big deal. He looked at my craftsmanship and saw only dollar signs. I had spent the last 3 days preparing. The house was spotless. The turkey was 20 pounds, roasting slowly. The pies, apple and pumpkin, Emma's recipes were cooling on the rack. I had meticulously prepared the 2 guest rooms upstairs. Fresh sheets, the good ones with the high thread count, fluffy white towels. I even placed small vases of holly on the nightstands, just like Emma used to do. I was trying to keep her traditions alive, but it felt like I was just rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. I checked my watch. They were late. Mark was always late. It was a power play, a way to remind everyone that his time was more valuable than theirs. I noticed he always adjusted the expensive watch on his wrist when he was trying to assert control. A nervous tick I'd clocked months ago. I walked into the kitchen and checked the turkey again. Golden brown, perfect. I tried to focus on the food, but a cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Something felt wrong. It had felt wrong for months, ever since Sarah started talking about Mark's big opportunity. This visit felt different. It felt less like a holiday and more like a siege. The doorbell finally rang, sharp and loud. It cut through the quiet Christmas music. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron. I walked to the front door. This was it. I opened the door. Snow swirled around them, caught in the porch light. Sarah, my only child, stood there. She was wrapped in a fur coat I hadn't seen before. Expensive. She didn't smile. She didn't hug me. She just brushed past me, pulling a large rolling suitcase. "It's freezing, Dad," she said, her voice sharp, tight. "Can you help with the bags?" My heart sank. No, Merry Christmas. No, it's good to see you. Just a demand. It was like I was the help. Mark followed. His arms were full of shiny designer gift bags. He didn't greet me either. He just looked around the foyer, his eyes scanning the hardwood floors, the crown molding, the antique chandelier Emma loved. Calculating, always calculating. "Robert," he said, a curt nod. "That's all I got." He adjusted his watch again. "You really need to get this driveway salted. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen." He wasn't criticizing my maintenance. He was assessing my liability. That was his greeting. A threat disguised as advice. Behind them stood George and Linda. They looked older than I remembered. Frail, perhaps, but their eyes were sharp. They looked uncertain, clutching their coats tightly. I managed to smile. I tried to be the host Emma would have wanted me to be. "Welcome. Please. Come in, out of the cold." They shuffled into the hallway, stomping snow onto the floor I had polished that morning. The house, which had been so quiet, was suddenly filled with noise and chaos, and a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Mark dropped the gift bags in the middle of the hall. He took off his coat and threw it onto the banister. It slid off and landed on the floor. He left it there, a deliberate stain on my home. "Okay, let's get settled," he announced, rubbing his hands together. He spoke not as a guest, but as a man taking charge. "Where are my parents sleeping?" I bristled at his tone, but I kept my voice even. I was a builder. I knew how to handle pressure. I set up the 2 guest rooms upstairs. I said, pointing toward the staircase. They're very comfortable. One has a view of the backwoods, and the other has an attached bathroom. I thought that was generous. I was wrong. Mark stopped rubbing his hands. He stared at me. The hallway suddenly felt small. His look was one I knew well, pity mixed with contempt. He let the silence stretch, making sure everyone felt the weight of his disapproval. The guest rooms, he scoffed. He actually laughed. Robert, my parents are used to a certain standard. They aren't children who can just crash anywhere. Those rooms are tiny. Tiny. He called my work tiny. My jaw tightened. I built those rooms. They were spacious. This wasn't about the rooms. This was about control. Mark, the rooms are lovely, Sarah said, but her voice was tight. She still wouldn't look me in the eye. She kept staring at the floor. Dad worked hard on them. It wasn't a defense. It was an apology. For me, it made me feel even smaller. Lovely isn't good enough. Sarah, Mark snapped. He turned back to me, his expression hardening. The mask was slipping. The bully was emerging. Look, Robert, my parents are elderly. They need space. They need comfort. They need easy access to the ground floor. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. We all knew what was coming next. I felt the floorboards shift under my feet. They need the master suite. The master suite. My room. Emma's room. The room where we had spent 40 years of marriage. The room with the large windows overlooking the garden she loved. The room where she had taken her last breath. The air left my lungs. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I hadn't changed a thing in there. Her favorite blue robe still hung on the back of the door. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Her scent, lavender and vanilla, still lingered in the air. It was sacred ground. To give it up felt like losing her all over again. The thought of them in there made my skin crawl. No, I said. The word came out quieter than I intended, but it was firm, solid, like the foundation of this house. Mark laughed again, a short, harsh sound, like breaking glass. No? What do you mean? No? He looked at Sarah, then back at me, as if I were a child refusing to eat his vegetables. I mean, I am not giving up my bedroom, Mark. My voice grew stronger. The guest rooms are perfectly fine, but it's not the master suite, Linda piped up. Her voice was whiny, entitled. She clutched her handbag tightly, as if I might steal it. We heard the master suite here is beautiful. And the stairs, my hip has been acting up. She was lying. She had scurried into the house just fine moments ago. It is beautiful, I said, looking straight at her, and it is occupied. By me. The tension in the hallway was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. Sarah stepped closer. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were pleading, but not for understanding. For compliance. Dad, please, don't be difficult, she pleaded. Lowering her voice, the tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. It's just for a couple of nights. Be reasonable. They are our guests. Guests. They were acting like conquerors. I am being reasonable, Sarah. I opened my home to them, but I will not be displaced from my own bedroom. I took a deep breath, the grief rising in my throat. I looked at her, searching for my daughter in those cold eyes. That room, it's where your mother... I couldn't finish the sentence. The wound was still raw. I thought she would understand. She was her daughter, too. But Mark didn't care about wounds. He only cared about winning. He stepped closer, too close, invading my space. He was looking for a fight. He was looking to break me. Mark slammed his hand against the wall. The sound echoed in the foyer, a sharp crack that made George and Linda jump. Oh, for God's sake, Robert, stop it, he shouted. His face was red, contorted in rage. Stop it with the grieving husband act. The grieving husband act. He called my pain a performance. My love for Emma, a melodrama. Emma is dead, he yelled, spittle flying from his lips. It's been 2 years. Get over it. It's just a room my parents need more than you do. His words hit me like a physical blow. The cruelty was staggering, but sadly, not surprising. Mark had been chipping away at me ever since he married Sarah, always hinting I had too much for one person. He didn't just want the room. He wanted me gone. Erased. This discussion is over, I said, my voice hardening, cold as steel. I felt a familiar strength rising in my chest. The strength of a man who knows his foundation. The guest rooms are upstairs. Dinner will be ready in an hour. I turned and walked into the kitchen. I needed space. I needed air. I heard them arguing behind me. Hushed, angry tones. Mark's sharp voice. Sarah's pleading whispers. I leaned against the counter. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were pushing me, testing my limits. But they didn't realize what happens when you push too hard. Sometimes the thing you push against pushes back. An hour later, we were seated around the large dining table. Emma's best china, the silver polished bright. The crystal glasses sparkling under the chandelier. But the atmosphere was icy. The food couldn't warm the coldness in the room. George and Linda ate in stiff silence, clearly offended by their accommodations upstairs. They acted like I'd put them in the attic. Mark was aggressively carving his turkey, sawing at it like he was trying to kill it again. His resentment was palpable. Sarah kept looking nervously between Mark and me, picking at her food. She looked trapped, but she had chosen this trap. The silence stretched, broken only by the clinking of silverware. The silence was heavy, waiting to be broken, and Mark was the one to break it. He chewed slowly, theatrically. He swirled the wine in his glass. He was putting on a show. This turkey is a bit dry, isn't it? Mark announced loudly. He took a large gulp of wine. He had already finished 2 glasses. The turkey was perfect, moist, flavorful. But Mark needed to criticize something. He needed to assert his dominance. "It seems fine to me, dear," George muttered, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. Even his own father seemed weary of his attitude. "No, it's dry," Mark insisted. He looked around the dining room, his eyes landing on the large antique sideboard I had restored, just like this whole house. Old and dry. He was talking about me, not the house. "Honestly, Robert, why do you cling to all this old stuff?" he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "This house is a museum. It's way too big for you. You rattle around in here like a ghost. A ghost. Maybe I was. A ghost haunting the memories of the life I used to have." "I like my stuff, Mark," I replied, keeping my eyes on my plate. My voice was steady, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. "And I like my house. I built it. I built it." That meant something to me. It meant nothing to him. "But think of what you could do with the money," Mark pressed. He leaned forward. His tone shifted, becoming smoother, like a salesman closing a deal. This was his true self. The manipulator, the shark smelling blood in the water. "This neighborhood is booming," he said, his eyes gleaming with greed. "You could sell this place for over $1 million, easily. I know the market." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. $1 million. It was a lot of money. But it wasn't worth the memory. "You could move into one of those nice, small condos downtown," he continued, painting a picture of a life I didn't want. "The ones with the elevators and the assisted living services." Assisted living? He was trying to put me in a box. A small, manageable box. He wanted me dependent. "You could travel, relax," he continued, "and you could help us out." Here it comes, I thought. The real reason for the visit. It was never about the master suite. It was never about Christmas. It was about the money. "Help you out?" I asked, playing dumb. I knew exactly what he wanted. I had known for months, but I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted Sarah to hear it. "Mark's business is expanding." "Dad," Sarah said quickly. She sounded rehearsed, robotic, like she was reading from a script Mark had written for her. "We have a huge opportunity, a development project, the biggest one yet." Her eyes were bright, but there was a desperation behind them, a fear. They weren't just here for Christmas. They were here for my life savings. "But we need capital," she continued. "If you sold the house, You could invest in us. She paused, then delivered the final blow. The emotional blackmail. It would be a legacy for the grandchildren you never see. The grandchildren, that hurt. They lived only an hour away. But Sarah was always too busy, too wrapped up in Mark's world. They kept the kids away from me. They were weapons she used against me. My legacy is this house, Sarah, I said, my voice tight with emotion. The one I built for your mother. The one you grew up in. The one where we carved your height on the doorframe. The one where we lived and loved. Mark snorted. A dismissive, arrogant sound. A legacy doesn't pay the bills, Robert, he said, leaning back in his chair. A pile of bricks and wood isn't a legacy. It's an asset. And right now, it's an asset you are wasting. Wasting. He thought my life, my memories were a waste. He stood up, towering over the table. The wine in his glass sloshed dangerously. He was drunk, and when Mark was drunk, he was cruel. The mask was completely off now. The monster beneath was revealed. The storm was about to break, and I was ready for it. You sit here, hoarding everything, Mark spat, his face red with anger and wine. The big room, the big house, the savings. And for what? To just sit on it while your family struggles? While your daughter has to beg for scraps? Struggles? That fur coat Sarah was wearing cost more than my car. They weren't struggling. They were just greedy. You won't even let my parents sleep in a decent bed, he roared, his voice echoing in the large room. He was losing control, spiraling. Good. I needed him to lose control. Mark, sit down, I commanded. My voice was low, dangerous. I knew how to handle unstable structures. And Mark was about to collapse. No! I'm tired of your selfish behavior, he screamed, his voice cracking. You pretend to be this saintly, grieving husband, but you're just a miserable, controlling, greedy old man. And then he did it, the thing I knew he would do, the thing I needed him to do. He gripped his wine glass. His knuckles were white, his eyes locked on mine, filled with pure malice. Time seemed to slow down. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. The air crackled with his rage. Everyone froze. With a flick of his wrist, he threw the contents of his glass directly at me. The cold, red liquid hit my chest, splashing onto my face, soaking my best white shirt, the shirt Emma bought me for my last birthday before she died. The shock of it paralyzed me for a second. The coldness, the stinging in my eyes. The silence around the table was absolute. It was the sound of a family breaking apart. George and Linda gasped, their eyes wide with horror. They were embarrassed, but they didn't move. Sarah covered her mouth, but she didn't move either. She didn't defend me. I slowly wiped the wine from my eyes. It stung, but the pain in my chest was far worse. It was a burning, crushing weight. I looked at my daughter. My Sarah, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, the one I held while she cried when her mother died. Sarah, I whispered, hoping, praying, for her to see me, to show some shred of the sweet girl I raised. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. For a fleeting moment, I thought she was coming to help me, to comfort me, but she walked over to Mark and took his hand. She held his hand tightly, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath, as if preparing for a speech. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. She looked at me, her face twisted in a way I had never seen before. It was a look of pure hatred, cold, dead. He deserved it, she said, her voice clear, strong. You are selfish. You always have been. The words pierced my heart deeper than any knife could. Deserved it. My own daughter. The betrayal was complete. You care more about this house and Mom's memory than you care about me, she continued, her voice rising. I am done, Dad. If you can't support my husband, if you can't support my family, then don't call me your daughter anymore, disowned by my own flesh and blood. For money, my own daughter gone, replaced by this cold stranger. I looked at the faces around the table, Mark's arrogant, his cruel smile twisting his lips. He thought he had won, Sarah's betrayal, her eyes dead to me. George and Linda's silent complicity. They had drawn the battle lines, and I was on the other side, alone. And then something inside me settled. The hurt was still there, immense, crushing, but the confusion was gone. Everything suddenly became crystal clear. I had been hoping I was wrong about them. I had been praying for a miracle, that they still loved me. But the miracle didn't come. The truth was sitting right in front of me. Ugly, unavoidable. They weren't my family anymore. They were my enemies. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a sad, knowing smile. The smile of a man who realized he had been playing a game he didn't want to play, but was determined to win. They wanted a war. Fine, I would give them one. I pushed my chair back and stood up slowly. The wine dripped from my shirt onto the floor, staining the rug Emma had loved. "You're smiling?" Mark sneered, his confidence returning. He thought my smile was a sign of defeat, of madness. "Have you finally lost it, old man?" "Good. This will make things easier." He thought I was broken. He thought I was weak. I ignored him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. My hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped. The anger had crystallized into resolve. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I had saved for this exact moment, a moment I had hoped would never come. But I had prepared for it. The phone rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "Hello, Robert?" "Hello, David?" I said. My voice steady, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. David was my oldest friend, a man I trusted with my life, and as of 6 months ago, when I first suspected Mark's intentions, David became my forensic accountant. "David," I repeated, looking straight at Mark. His smug expression faltered. Confusion flickered in his eyes. Phase 1 complete. There was a brief pause on the line. David understood. He knew what that meant. The wine incident. The trigger. "Understood, Robert. We are on our way." I hung up the phone and placed it carefully on the table. The game had changed, and they didn't even know it yet. Mark and Sarah stared at me, their expressions shifting from triumph to confusion. They didn't understand. They still thought they were in control. "Who was that?" Sarah demanded. Her voice sharp, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "Your lawyer? Are you going to write me out of the will? Go ahead. We don't need your scraps." She still thought this was about the will. It was so much bigger than that. Mark laughed, emboldened by Sarah's outburst. He still underestimated me. "Phase 1? What is this? Some kind of spy movie?" he mocked. "You think you scare us, Robert? You have nothing." He walked towards the sideboard where the liquor bottles were kept. He needed a drink. He needed to reinforce his sense of superiority. "I think I need something stronger to deal with this melodrama," he said, pouring himself a large whiskey. His hand was shaking slightly. He adjusted his watch again. They still thought they were in control. They saw me as weak, broken. They couldn't have been more wrong. If this story has your heart racing, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Every click helps us keep uncovering stories that deserve to be heard. Because sometimes the truth is uglier than fiction. While they were distracted, gloating over their perceived victory, I heard a noise from the hallway. Footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, Linda appeared at the entrance to the dining room. She was holding something. A small, silver-framed photograph. It was a picture of Emma and me on our wedding day. She had taken it from my bedroom. She had invaded my sacred space. "Mark, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She was nervous but also greedy. "I went to check the master suite. It is lovely." The audacity was breathtaking. She had actually gone into my room, touched my things, started erasing my presents. Erasing Emma. I started clearing some of Robert's personal items, to make space for us. She continued, holding the photo up like a trophy. "We might as well move in there now. He clearly isn't going to cooperate." She thought she could claim it by force, like a vulture picking at a carcass. I moved quickly, faster than they expected, an old man to move. I stood in front of her, blocking her path. "Put that back, Linda," I said. My voice cold as ice. Deadly quiet. Linda stopped, shocked by my tone. She clutched the photograph to her chest as if it were a shield. "But we assumed—" "You assumed wrong," I said, cutting her off. "Get out of my room, now." She scurried away, terrified by the sudden display of authority. The power dynamic had shifted. She felt it, but the damage was done. The violation felt complete. Mark slammed his whiskey glass down on the table. The amber liquid splashed onto the polished wood. "Now listen here, you stubborn fool." He advanced on me, his face contorted in rage. He was losing control again. The whiskey fueling his anger, he jabbed his finger into my chest, right where the wine stain was still wet. His breath was hot and sour with whiskey. "This is not your house anymore," he hissed. "We are taking over. Taking over." He finally said it. The quiet part out loud, and then he revealed their ultimate plan. "The nuclear option, and if you don't cooperate, we will have you declared incompetent," he threatened, his voice low and venomous. "We have the evidence. Your forgetfulness. Your erratic behavior tonight. Incompetent." He was trying to gaslight me, to make me doubt my own sanity. They wanted to steal my mind. Not just my house. "We'll put you in the cheapest nursing home we can find," he continued, twisting the knife. "And you will rot there." This was their plan all along. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control. It was about erasing me completely. Was it? I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Incompetent? I don't think so, Mark," I said, my voice calm. "I think you'll find I am very much in control of my faculties." His eyes narrowed, unnerved by my calmness. He expected fear. He expected submission. He didn't expect defiance. He realized I wasn't afraid of him. The threat hung in the air. Ugly and venomous. "Is that what you want, Sarah?" I asked, looking past Mark to my daughter. She was standing by the fireplace, her face pale. I needed to know if there was anything left of her. Sarah hesitated. Just for a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a hint of the girl she used to be. The sweet, compassionate girl, Emma, raised, but then she looked at the floor, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion, the emotion Mark had taught her to use as a weapon. She shifted tactics, from anger to guilt. "You did this to yourself, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "You always loved this house more than me." The accusation stung. It was a lie, but a clever one. "Even when Mom was alive, you were always working on it, restoring it," she continued, building the narrative of neglect, making my love for my work, for providing, into a weapon. And after she died, you disappeared. You shut me out. You clung to her memory like a shield, pushing me away. Her words stunned me. Was that true? Had I neglected her in my grief? For a moment, guilt washed over me, mixing with the anger and betrayal. But then I recognized the manipulation. It was Mark's words coming out of her mouth. He had poisoned her against me. They were trying to break me emotionally, since they couldn't break me physically. "I mourned your mother, Sarah," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I did not push you away. You chose to leave. You chose him. You chose his world." The guilt evaporated, replaced by cold clarity. She was lost to me. Mark, realizing the emotional manipulation wasn't working, shifted tactics again. He adopted an air of superiority, the mask he wore in public. The successful businessman. "Look, Robert," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. He adjusted his tie as if he were in a boardroom, not a dining room, stained with wine. "We don't want this unpleasantness. We are trying to help you." He walked over to his briefcase, which he had left by the door. He opened it and pulled out a stack of papers. "Sign the house over to us," he said, holding out the documents. "We have the documents ready. A quitclaim deed? Simple. Clean. They came prepared. They planned this whole thing." He thought I was a fool. "We'll let you keep a small percentage of the sale," he offered, as if he were being generous. "Enough to live comfortably in that condo downtown. A consolation prize. A consolation prize for the house I built with my own hands. For the life I created." I laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "A consolation prize?" "I don't need your charity, Mark," I said, shaking my head. "I know exactly what this house is worth." I paused, letting the next words land with the weight they deserved. "And I know exactly what you were worth." Mark's face flushed with anger. He realized I wasn't the clueless old man he thought I was. He realized I knew more than I was letting on. "You are making a big mistake, Robert," he threatened, his voice low and dangerous, shaking with suppressed rage. "No," I said. "I believe you are the one who made the mistake, Tom. The mistake of underestimating me. The mistake of thinking I wouldn't fight back." I walked towards the study, a small room off the dining room where I kept my blueprints and financial records. Mark and Sarah followed me, their footsteps hesitant. They were curious and afraid. I opened the door to the study. The room was neat, organized. I walked over to my desk and picked up a thick binder. It was heavy, filled with months of investigation. The investigation David and I had conducted. The truth about Mark Johnson. "You said your business was expanding, Mark," I said, turning to face them. "You said you needed capital, but you were lying." I opened the binder. The pages were filled with numbers, charts, documents, the evidence, the proof of his crimes. "Your business isn't expanding, Mark. It's collapsing," I said, my voice steady. "You're drowning in debt, millions of dollars in debt." Mark went pale. The color drained from his face. He adjusted his watch again, the nervous tick returning with a vengeance. "You've been running a Ponzi scheme," I continued, laying out the truth in simple, clear terms. I looked him straight in the eye, letting him see the contempt I felt for him, using money from new investors to pay off the old ones. And now the whole thing is falling apart. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "That's ridiculous," Mark shouted, but his voice was weak, desperate. "You have no proof. You're delusional." He was grasping at straws, trying to maintain the illusion of control. "The proof is right here," I said, tapping the binder. "Bank statements, investor testimonies, forged documents. David tracked every transaction, every lie." I paused, letting the weight of his crimes sink in. "We even spoke to Thomas Reed," I continued. "Your former partner, the one who tipped us off 6 months ago when you forced him out. Thomas was the first thread we pulled, and the whole ugly sweater unraveled. And Mrs. Gable," I added, my voice softening with pity. "The elderly widow whose retirement fund you stole. She lost everything, Mark." I looked at him, pity mixing with the anger. "You've stolen millions, Mark," I said, "and you thought you could use my house, my savings, to cover your losses, to run away before the authorities caught up with you. He thought I was an easy target, an old man, grieving and alone. He was wrong." Sarah looked at Mark, her eyes wide with horror, confusion, betrayal. "Mark? A Ponzi scheme? Thomas Reed? What is he talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't know, or maybe she did, and she chose to ignore it. "It didn't matter anymore. He's lying, Sarah. Don't listen to him," Mark shouted, desperate to keep her on his side. He needed her complicity. The mask was shattered. The predator was cornered. He lunged towards the desk, trying to grab the binder to destroy the evidence. "Give me that," he yelled, his eyes wild with panic. "You crazy old man. You don't understand finance." I slammed my hand down on the binder, holding it tight. I was older, but I was stronger than he realized. I spent 40 years hauling lumber. I still had strength. "I understand theft, Mark," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I understand betrayal." He recoiled. Realizing his aggression wouldn't work, he realized he was trapped. He was weak, a bully who couldn't handle a real fight. Sarah was crying now. Real tears this time, not the manufactured emotion from earlier. Confusion and fear warred on her face. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on the mantelpiece above the fireplace in the living room. On it sat a large crystal vase. Emma had cherished that vase. It was a gift from her mother. Sarah walked over to the fireplace and picked up the vase. Her fingers brushed against the delicate crystal. She was looking for leverage, a way to regain control. "Stop this, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "Stop this madness. Admit you were wrong. Tell Mark you apologize. Apologize for exposing the truth, for defending my home, or I will smash this vase," she threatened, holding it high, ready to destroy the last piece of her mother she had left. "I will destroy the last piece of Mom you have left." The threat was cruel, calculated to inflict maximum pain. She knew how much that vase meant to me. I looked at the vase, remembering how much Emma loved it, the way the light caught the edges, the delicate patterns. But I looked back at Sarah, and I saw only a stranger, a cold, cruel stranger, who had already destroyed something far more precious. "Go ahead," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it was loud enough. "Smash it. It's just a thing. It was just a thing. My legacy wasn't in things. It was in the life I built, the values I held." "You already destroyed something far more precious," I said, looking straight into her eyes. "Our relationship, our family, our love." Sarah stared at me, the vase trembling in her hands. She couldn't do it. She realized the emotional blackmail had failed. She placed the vase carefully back on the mantelpiece. Her leverage gone, her power evaporated, the fight went out of them. They knew they were caught. The arrogance, the entitlement, the greed, it all melted away, leaving behind two very frightened people. And then the sound of sirens filled the air. They started faint. A distant wail, but grew rapidly louder, closer. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, reflecting off the snow-covered lawn, painting the room in alternating shades of blue and red. The cavalry had arrived. Mark and Sarah froze. "What is that?" Mark asked, looking nervously towards the window. The sirens stopped right outside the house. Car doors slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched on the snow-covered path. A loud, authoritative knock echoed through the house. Mark straightened his tie, adopting an air of confidence he clearly didn't feel. He still thought he could talk his way out of this. He adjusted his watch one last time. "Don't worry," he whispered to Sarah. "I'll handle this. The old man probably called the police when I threw the wine. He thought this was about a domestic dispute. He thought he could manipulate the situation. We'll tell them they assaulted me," he continued, weaving the lie, "that he's unstable." He actually smiled, a twisted, arrogant grin. "This will actually help us get him committed." He was still trying to destroy me. Even now, he still thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was about to get a rude awakening. I stood still, waiting. The trap had been sprung. Mark walked to the front door and pulled it open. Two police officers stood on the porch, their faces grim, serious. One was older, tall, with a stern face. I recognized him, Detective Miller. Behind them was David, holding a briefcase. "Good evening, officers," Mark said, his voice smooth and practiced. The charmer was back. The salesman voice. "I'm glad you're here. We've had a bit of an incident with my father-in-law." He gestured towards me, adopting a look of concern. "He's elderly and seems to be having some sort of mental break," he continued. "He became aggressive. He was trying to spin the narrative, to paint me as the villain." Detective Miller interrupted him. He wasn't interested in Mark's lies. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on Mark. "Are you Mark Johnson?" the detective asked, his voice cold and professional. "Yes, I am," Mark said, puffing out his chest slightly. Proud of his name, his status. "Mark Johnson, you are under arrest for securities fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mark's mouth fell open. He stared at the officer, speechless. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and ghostly.
He looked like a fish gasping for air. "What?"
"That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking. "There must be some mistake. I am a respected businessman." Detective Miller pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic sound echoed in the quiet foyer. The sound of the metal clicking was music to my ears. "No mistake, Mr. Johnson," the detective said. "We have a warrant for your arrest. The SEC has been investigating you for months." The investigation I had triggered. The investigation David had fueled with evidence. Thanks to the information provided by Mr. David and the testimonies of victims like Thomas Reed and Mrs. Gable. Detective Miller added, "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." David stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He looked at Mark with cold disdain. "Hello, Mark," David said, his voice calm and precise. "It seems your little Ponzi scheme finally collapsed." He pulled out a stack of documents. The real documents. We provided the SEC with all the evidence they needed, David explained. He smiled, a cold, knowing smile. The binder Robert has is just a copy. The originals are safe. The trap was airtight. There was no escape. Mark had walked right into it. Sarah rushed to the door, her face pale with terror. What is going on? Mark, what are they talking about? You told me the business was expanding, she screamed, her voice hysterical. The second officer turned to her. Are you Sarah Johnson? Yes, she whispered, trembling. You may also be implicated, ma'am, the officer said. We need you to come down to the station for questioning. We need to determine your level of involvement in your husband's criminal activities. Implicated. She was part of it. Whether she knew it or not. No, I didn't do anything. I didn't know, Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face. She looked at me, pleading, Dad, help me. Tell them. Tell them I didn't know. I looked at her. My daughter. The stranger. The one who had called me selfish. The one who had told me I deserved to have wine thrown in my face. The one who was willing to have me committed to a nursing home. I felt nothing. The pain was gone, replaced by a cold, empty void. I said nothing. Mark, now handcuffed, turned to me, his eyes blazing with realization and hatred. You did this, he roared, struggling against the handcuffs. You set me up. You planned this whole thing. He finally understood. He finally realized I wasn't the weak, broken old man he thought I was. I walked slowly to the door, the wine stain on my shirt still damp. You did this to yourself, Mark, I said quietly. You were greedy. You were cruel. And you underestimated me. I looked at him, and for the first time, I revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The secret weapon I had kept hidden until the very end. The piece that ensured he wouldn't get away with a slap on the wrist. You see, Mark, I didn't just provide evidence of your financial crimes, I said, my voice steady. I also provided evidence of your past. Sarah gasped. His past? What are you talking about? Mark has a criminal record, I explained, looking at Sarah. Fraud. He served time before he met you, Sarah. He hid it from you. He lied to you. He was on parole. Mark closed his eyes, defeated, the final nail in the coffin. He knew it was over, and one of the conditions of his parole was that he avoid any aggressive behavior, David added, his voice sharp and precise. Any contact with the police. David pointed to the wine stain on my shirt. When you threw that wine at Robert, that was assault. That violated your parole. That was the trigger. The reason the police could arrest him immediately. That was phase 1, David concluded. Phase 1, Mark whispered, understanding dawning on him. The phone call, the calmness, it all made sense now. The realization that his own arrogance had destroyed him. We needed a reason for the police to arrest you immediately. While the SEC finalized their case, I confirmed, we needed you to show your true colors, to expose the monster underneath the mask. We needed you to break the law in front of a witness. Me. I looked at the wine stain on my shirt. You gave it to us on a silver platter. He was too arrogant, too impulsive. He couldn't control his anger. The realization hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with horror and betrayal. The man she had chosen over her own father. The man she had defended. The man who had lied to her from the very beginning. She had sacrificed her father for this man, a liar, a thief. You lied to me, she whispered to Mark. You used me. Our whole life was a lie. Mark didn't respond. He couldn't even look at her. The charming manipulator had nothing left to say. The coward, he was broken. The officers led Mark away. He struggled for a moment, then realized it was futile. He walked down the path, his head bowed in defeat. Sarah followed, escorted by the second officer, her sobs echoing in the cold night air. They were put into the back of the police cars, the blue and red lights painting a tragic picture against the festive Christmas decorations. George and Linda stood in the hallway, their faces ashen. They hadn't said a word during the entire ordeal. They were paralyzed by fear and shame. They were complicit. They knew what their son was. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, David said, turning to them. His voice was cold, dismissive. I suggest you pack your bags and leave this property immediately. You will be contacted by the authorities regarding your knowledge of your son's activities. They were no longer welcome in my home. They nodded mutely, shame and humiliation etched on their faces. They quickly gathered their belongings and left, without ever looking at me, without ever apologizing. The police cars drove away, the sirens fading into the distance. Silence descended on the house once more. A heavy, profound silence. David stood with me on the porch, watching the taillights disappear into the snowy night. The cold air felt good on my face.
Are you all right, Robert?
He asked, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. No, I said honestly. The weight of what had happened settled on me. The truth was heavy. I don't think I will ever be all right again. I had lost my daughter. I had lost my family. There is no recovery from that. You did the right thing, Robert, David reassured me. They would have destroyed you. They would have taken everything you built. I know. We walked back into the house. The dining room was a mess. The unfinished dinner, the spilled wine, the shattered glass, the remnants of a battle fought and won. David stayed for a while, assuring me that the case against Mark was airtight, that he would handle everything regarding the legal fallout. He was a good friend, a true friend. He told me Mark would go to prison for a long time, and Sarah's fate was uncertain. Her life, as she knew it, was over. After David left, I was alone. Truly alone. I started to clean up the mess. I picked up the plates, the food cold and congealed. I wiped the wine stain from the rug, the dark red color fading to a dull pink. But it would never be completely gone. I threw the ruined tablecloth in the trash. I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the crystal vase Sarah had threatened to smash. I looked at the delicate patterns, the way the light caught the edges. It was beautiful, but it was just I went upstairs to the guest rooms. I stripped the beds, urging the presence of the people who had tried to steal my life. Then I walked downstairs to my room, the master suite, Emma's room. I opened the door and stepped inside. The scent of lavender and vanilla welcomed me, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The wine stain on my shirt was dark, like blood. I looked old, tired, broken. But I wasn't broken. I was still standing. My eyes were clear. I changed my shirt, putting on an old, comfortable flannel. I sat on the edge of the bed I shared with Emma for 40 years. I picked up the framed photo of us on our wedding day, the one Linda had taken and then abandoned. We were so young, so full of hope and dreams. I protected it, Emma, I whispered, tracing the outline of her face on the glass. I protected what we built. Our home is safe. Tears finally fell. Hot and heavy, they were tears of grief, of anger, of profound sadness. I had won the battle, but the cost was devastating. I had saved my house, my legacy, my dignity, but I had lost my daughter. The victory felt hollow. I had exposed the greed and betrayal that infected my family. I had achieved justice, but the silence in the house was deafening. Christmas Eve was supposed to be about family, love, and forgiveness, but in my house it was a night of reckoning. I lay down on the bed, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. I knew the coming days would be difficult. The legal battles, the fallout from the investigation, the painful process of rebuilding my life without Sarah. But as I closed my eyes, I felt a small flicker of peace. It was a painful peace, bought at a terrible price, but it was real. I was no longer a victim in my own home. I was the master of my own life again. I looked out the window at the falling snow, covering the tracks of the police cars, blanketing the world in white. I was an old man, yes, but I was not weak, and I was certainly not greedy. I was just a man who finally understood the true meaning of legacy, and the painful reality that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who betray you the deepest. And sometimes the only way to protect what you built is to let them go. Thanks for listening. Please rate this story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Your ruse means a lot because your time matters.